Okay, it's now 5:33, so we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, let me begin by thanking everyone. My name is Willie McCather, and I serve as the Vice President for Diversity, Inclusion, and Vice Provost here at the University of Toledo. While he will do his own introductions in just a moment, I can say for now that I'm proud to be hosting this event with Dr. Flap Cockrell, who serves as the Vice President of the Division of Student Affairs and Vice Provost. Let me say I'm happy to see so many of our faculty, staff, and students, and of course, community partners on today's call. I'm seeing 200 and about 60 people, 55 people so far. I only wish that this was under different circumstances. Of course, this is where we find, um, ourselves as a country, as a state, and as a university. And if I can ask everyone, please, if you could just please mute your line, if you could mute your line, please, for everyone. So my job is to kick off this evening's program and to provide a context. So as you all know, 25th, George Floyd had his life literally squeezed out of him by white police officers in Minneapolis. Unfortunately, this is not the first time a white police officers have killed unarmed African American men and women in this country. So again, let me ask everybody if you could please mute your lines. Please mute your lines, everyone, please. Thank you. So each time an unarmed black man, we're stunned as a nation and left asking, why is this happening? Who's responsible? And when will it stop? Even though we march and we protest both with and without violence, at the end of the day, whether officers are brought to justice or not, it keeps happening. If I may be so bold as to insert Fannie Lou Hamer, when she said in 1964 during the Civil Rights Movement, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Fannie Lou Hamer was sick and tired of racial injustices and criminal acts against African Americans in the American South, and the inaction of the American government to fix a system that devalued the lives of African Americans. Sadly, here we are 56 years later, having had our first African American president, past and current national, state, and local elected officials, college presidents, vice presidents, professors, police chiefs, and officers, and yet we're here asking ourselves again, why? Even though we know part or perhaps all of the answer lies in a country born out of slavery that recreated race-based systems of oppression aimed at keeping African Americans inferior, now is a country rooted in systemic racism that seemingly devalues the lives of African Americans. George Floyd and the many other African Americans did not deserve to die at the hands of those sworn to serve and protect them. This evening, through respected and perhaps painful dialogue, we begin a conversation that I can imagine has been held in many cities throughout our country and even through the world. A dialogue that we hope will begin a healing process that will allow current and future leaders to engage a conversation that we hope answers thoughts about the intentional work of dealing with racism that lay ahead of us. So thank you. That's my introduction of the context, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Cockrell.
Thank you, Dr. McCather. Good evening and welcome to the virtual dialogue on diversity. As Dr. McCather said, my name is Flap Cockrell and I serve as the Vice President for Student Affairs and Vice Provost here at the University of Toledo. I'd like to thank all of you all so much for participating in this event. Like many of you, I too am grappling with so many emotions regarding the recent events. It is my hope and prayer that this space will provide some comfort and solace during these difficult and uncertain times. I'm so grateful and blessed to work for an institution of higher learning who values diversity, equity, and inclusion, and provide avenues for us to identify solutions to address systematic racism, police brutality.
Yeah. I did it. I'm like, all right, let's do it. Right. Done like a different technology.
Change your communities. Although heartbroken by the tragic events, I'm so proud of our students, faculty, and staff who have shown their unwavering support through peaceful demonstrations, phone calls, text messages, emails, and social media posts. Your support means the world to the entire Black and Brown community. As we prepare to engage in this discussion, please take a moment to review our community of care statement. For those of you who are listening via phone, the statement reads, as a participant in this roundtable, we ask you to be respectful of your peers' thoughts and opinions. The intent of this roundtable is not to be confrontational or argumentative with one another, but to be a space where the Toledo community members can be their authentic selves and share their thoughts and feelings within a civil manner. Again, I would like to thank all of you all so much for participating and engaging with us in this dialogue. At this time, I will turn it back over to Dr. McKether to provide an overview of the roundtable format and the objectives.
Thank you, Dr. Cockrell. And it's on the screen, but again, I'll read it as well. So we've already sort of have done our objectives. We'll then in the program have a moment of silence in observance of George Floyd. We'll then have student reflections, and that's where we'll have a number of student leaders to share their thoughts about where we are. That will then be followed up with faculty and staff reflections, and we're honored to have them here as well. Followed up with question and answer period from our callers and our listeners. Then a call to action. We will want to engage in some conversation about what should we do next. So we're going to ask people, at the appropriate time to begin chatting about what you think we can do moving forward. Then Dr. Cockrell will share campus and community resources, and then we'll wind the evening up by 7 o'clock with some closing thoughts. So I turn it back over to Dr. Cockrell for program objectives.
So as you will see here on our screen, we have our program objectives.
Okay, Dr. Crocker, if you can hear me, your screen has frozen.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. Secondly, we want to create an environment of solid support for those affected. So we know that people are experiencing available to you that we will share towards the end of this presentation. Thirdly, we want to identify solutions to address systemic racial injustice. So Dr. McKether just talked a little bit about that during our call to action. And then lastly, we most certainly want to highlight some of our campus and community resources that we have available here to assist not only employees, but also to assist our students. And so these are our program objectives. As Dr. McKether said earlier, this is the first of our series. We plan to have a number of these roundtable discussions within upcoming weeks. And so Dr. McKether will share that towards the end of the presentation. And so we're going to move forward with our presentation today. And so our student government leaders, Nick Thompson and Anjali Fudke, who's our vice president, are going to lead us in a moment of silence. So Nick and Anjali, you have permission to unmute your lines and lead us in a moment of silence.
All right, thank you, Dr. Flapp. Before we begin tonight's roundtable, let us take a moment to remember the Black lives lost to systemic violence in the United States.
Nick and I would like to take the time to have a moment of silence for George Floyd and all other Black Americans who have lost their lives to police brutality. At this time, please turn off your microphones if you haven't already. And we're going to take a moment of silence now. Thank you. Thank you for this moment of silence, and thank you for the respect.
Thank you so much, Anjali and Nick. We most certainly appreciate your leadership as our student government leaders.
Tiny face. I just need you to. I need you. It's this WebEx. It's not the best platform.
To the host.
Unless the host knows how to mute.
There is the possibility of having everybody that comes in already muted on the participant on the top of the menu. You go to participant and mute people as they enter.
Everyone as they enter.
Okay, thank you, Dr. McCarther. And so at this time, we'll have student reflections from three of our student leaders. And so Darren Gordon is representing our Student National Medical Association and Black Graduate and Professional Student Association. Naya Kidd, who's representing the Black Student Union, and Isabel Gruhl, who's representing SILGA, which is our Sexuality and Gender Alliance. And so we've asked each student to prepare 2-minute comments, and following their comments, Dr. McCarthy with some reflections as well. So Darren, followed by Naya, followed by Isabel. So Darren, you're free to unmute your line and share your comments at this time. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Darren McHale Gordon, an MD student at the University of Toledo College of Medicine and Life Sciences. Honestly, it's quite upsetting to experience the duality of a health and social pandemic. These last few weeks have challenged me to wrestle more with how I'm expected to uphold my family, friends, and peers in the face of the racial and social injustices. Even still, I am compelled to advocate nationally for underrepresented minorities as a member of the Student National Medical Association and locally within the graduate community with my role in the revival of the Black Graduate and Professional Student Association this year. My pre-career experience has left me hypervigilant to the reality that race permeates every facet of my development. And while race can explain the beautiful intricacies of cultural behavior, modern rhetoric of race often stirs up visuals of riots, counter-social development, and sometimes violence. Ultimately, we must dismantle the institutional groundwork which has led to the decrepit practices we may not even notice as racist, whether it is the designation of care, quality of care, and racially driven insufficiencies of care that often result in diminished health and wellness. In addition to solving healthcare insufficiency, we must remain aware that health is a multifactorial idea, often requiring changes in housing, business, and even public service practices, to name a few, for optimal results. We must galvanize voices that are often lost and forgotten. It's unfortunate that some of my patients from a similar background as I are worried that they may not attain adequate care simply based on their race, whether or not the provider is even conscious of it. What's worse is how race may have even played a role in them being in the clinic in the first place. Though the times are clearly murky, it is my hope that with transformative practices, UT can be a haven for the production of clinically excellent, culturally competent, and socially conscious physicians ready to dismantle the internal and external gears of racialized practice. Thank you.
Dr. Gordon, thank you so much for sharing your comments, and I do apologize for not addressing you properly. I know you most recently defended your dissertation, so congratulations to you, Dr. Gordon. Naya Kidd, representing the BSU, the Black Student Union. You can unmute your line and share your thoughts.
Good evening. My name is Naya Kidd, and I'm the president of the Student Union. Before I start, I thank everyone for attending and the University of Toledo faculty and staff for this platform to hear the voices of the students and faculty. Though this town hall will not stop the systemic racism that exists, it is a step in the right direction. Discussions like this are needed to be held more frequently so that our fellow Rockets may be heard. Whether you are from a marginalized community or not, this affects all of us and is only necessary for us to be united. if we hope to make a change. We are deeply saddened by the murder of George Floyd, but these protests and riots stem from hurt and pain from the continuous oppression of Black people. The Black Student Union is praying for those who are protesting, and we ask that you remain safe. BSU is working internally and with other organizations to bring knowledge to the campus during the school year, as well as making plans for immediate action. As plans are finalized, we will share on our social media platforms, and you will also be able to find resources posted daily on our social media as well. In order for all lives to matter, Black lives must matter. And though you may not be able to feel the hurt and pain, we ask that you were to put yourselves in our shoes. Put yourselves in the shoes for you to understand that it is our mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, loved ones that may hold different titles that are being killed. And that's all I have to say before I start crying. Thank you again.
Naya, thank you so much for your comments, and we thank you for your leadership with the BSU over the last year. And this is most certainly a safe space, so we're asking people to be their authentic selves and to be vulnerable. And so you most certainly have permission to shed tears or what have you, but we most certainly have resources to assist you as well. Next, we will have Isabella Grew, who's representing SAGA, which is the Sexuality and Gender Alliance. Isabel, you're free to unmute your lines and share your comments at this time. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Isabel Gill, and I am on the executive board with the Sexuality and Gender Alliance. I was also the former president of the Latino Student Union. I just wanted to say that I, like many of you, when I wanted to learn more about the history and the culture of the marginalized groups that I belong to, I often had to go look for that information myself. And one of the big things that you learn when you belong to the LGBTQ community is that the Stonewall riots were led by a trans Black woman. So it saddens me that in both the communities that I belong to, the Latino community and the LGBTQ community, that there's so much anti-Blackness ingrained in all of us, for people who don't want to go out and riot, for people who think that these riots are affecting them when it's really about how police brutality is affecting Black lives. And this is not the time for anyone of any communities to say, well, what about the Supreme Court cases? What about the kids who are locked up in cages at the border? I'm not talking anyone for anybody to stop advocating for those things. You should advocate for those things every day. But every day you should also be advocating that Black lives matter. So I just want to say that for any of you who are witnessing people saying these things, it's the time for you to speak up to others and say that this isn't the time to take away the spotlight from the Black Lives Matters movement just because you can't see your own biases inside of you. And I think everyone should look inside and see that, see what you can work on, what you can do, what resources we have to offer for the Black Lives Matter movement, for the kids locked in the cages, for LGBTQ trans Black people, for Black LGBTQ, for Afro Latinxes, for anybody who this movement affects, because it's not, as Naya said, all lives do matter, but before that happens, Black lives need to matter. That's all I wanted to say.
Isabella, thank you so much, and we most certainly appreciate your leadership with the Latino Student Union as well. And I just want to say I'm just so proud to serve as your Vice President for Student Affairs and Vice Provost. Just as I'm sitting here listening to you all, I'm kind of getting choked up myself because you all are just so amazing. And so thank you all so much for your leadership and your commitment to the University of Toledo. And we most certainly will hear from you all a little bit later. So at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. McKether to lead us in a discussion with our faculty and staff. Dr. McKether.
Great. Thank you to our students, and also thank you, Dr. Cockrell. So at the university, we have some amazingly talented faculty and staff. And so we thought it would be very appropriate to ask them to participate in tonight's program and to share their thoughts and to help provide some context from their own perspectives of what we've experienced and continue to experience in this country. So I'm going to start with Professor or Dr. Anita Mungo, who's the Assistant Professor of Sociology. Dr. Mungo, if you unmute your line, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind commenting you've heard from our students, and then share your own personal thoughts.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yep, thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you. I think as everyone so far has spoken is that it's unreal that in 2020 we are here, that we have to have these conversations, and that we have to portion out Black lives from all lives to say we are important in our lives and our ability to experience opportunities and our agency to fight for ourselves is getting, is not taking to the forefront. So I think our Naya and I think Isabella did a wonderful job at putting in Dr. Gordon, congratulations and welcome to the Academy. Did a really, good job in saying these are the issues that we struggle with and have been struggling with for a long time, right? This is not new, and what we are experiencing has gone on for a long time. And as my shirt says, we're exhausted, right? And so that's, literally why we are here. So those are my reflections about what was said.
Okay. Thank you. So can you now sort of, as you have thought about and you've experienced, what's been going on over the past, I'm going to say at least week and a half or even beyond, as a sociologist, someone who studies race, class, and gender, can you provide us your thoughts?
Yes, but I have prepared a statement to talk a little bit about something tangential to that. So I'm going to tell my statement, and if you have a question more specifically, I'll be willing to ask it.
Thank you. Please do so.
Thank you. I wanted to take the time to contextualize some of the images that we are seeing in the media, because I am afraid that certain messages or the main message is getting lost as a result of the way we are playing with words. This is a time that there are questions that we need to ask, and there are questions that deserve answers. There are also questions that deserve time and critical reflection before they are answered. What we are witnessing is an outward expression of sheer exhaustion. One way that exhaustion is being expressed is the taking and destruction of properties, right? The things of society. So I want to spend the next minute, I guess, and a half or two contextualizing these actions and clarifying the important message so that it doesn't get lost. It's important that we remember that taking things and destroying property is as American as apple pie and baseball. Historical examples abound. It occurs during protests of injustices. It occurs during sporting events, whether they win or they lose. It also occurs during wars in the Middle East. How these events are reported and remembered, however, is the problem. So words like progress, words like change, words like economic development and democracy, right? Those provide a positive framework for us to simply that lands were stolen and cities were burned, right? So let me be clear. I'm not saying that taking and destroying property is right. As a matter of fact, it is against the law. Their behavior, however, is a reaction to an ongoing problem in our society, in our country, and that's racism. Racism exists as a result of power. And so without power, then racism has no teeth. And so at the heart of the current protest is this feeling of powerlessness over our Black lives and over our Black bodies. So for some, looting becomes an act of empowerment, an opportunity to assert some form of power over a socio-economic system that exploits, constricts, penalizes, isolates, and murders without discipline. For some, looting becomes an avenue to even the proverbial scales or mechanisms of survival, gathering necessities are available to use themselves or to get things to sell for money to then provide for their basic necessities because there's economic inequality. For others, it is an opportunity for chaos and destruction. Whether the motives are legitimate or not, it is important that you do not let theft and property destruction distract from the reasons that the protests exist. And that is racism, that is the maltreatment of Black lives and bodies, that is the unjust justice system, that is the murder of another Black man by a white police officer. When you allow the criminalization of the protest behavior of some to be the main message, you unwittingly support the status quo of stifling the Black community's agency to exercise and work to change a system that continues to keep its knees on our necks. And that supports the status quo. The peaceful protesting that has occurred for years fell on deaf ears, and it was drowned out because our things were considered more important. A notable example is Kaepernick. His peaceful, silent, and kneeling protests of the very circumstances that bring us here today fell on deaf ears. Some cared more about the symbolism of the flag than Cap's actual message. As a country in general, American has this fascination with things. In 1967, when Dr. King spoke against the war in Vietnam, he called this fascination a thing-oriented society. He called for it to change to a more person-oriented society. And he warned that when profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people, then the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. So when the cries, both silent and violent, of a protest against a public murder of a Black man by a representative of the state is drowned out by concern for burning buildings and stuffs being stolen, it shows what our country values more. It allows the status quo of the giant triplets that Dr. King spoke of to continue their reign. I'm not saying go loot. I'm not saying go start fires. I am also not saying that both activities are acceptable. In fact, both activities are crimes. What I am saying is don't allow the criminalization of protest behavior of some to overpower the main message and peaceful actions of the Black community's agency to challenge injustice and inequity. Don't lose the message of eliminating systematic racial injustice by valuing things over life. I urge you to reflect, not as a justification for criminal behavior during moments of civil unrest, context from which to view what you are seeing across the country. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mungo, for those very insightful, that insight from your perspective, much appreciated. Of course, we will circle back to you a little bit later on in the program. Next, we're going to ask our own Chief, Jeff Newton, if you please unmute his line. And of course, Chief, feel free to comment on any of the comments from any of our students, and also please share your personal views.
All right, very good. Well, thank you for allowing me this opportunity to be here. It's really exciting to see. I look at the list of the names that's on this call, and some of them are very familiar to me, and some of them I haven't talked to in a long time, and it's great to see the students and hear from the students. I know that I offer a unique perspective on this, being a person whose career has been in law enforcement. I will tell you, though, that I am here mostly to listen. I think it's important that other voices are heard more than mine. But I'll briefly restate the obvious, that George Floyd was murdered by a police officer, and 3 other police officers contributed to that homicide. You already knew that. And you know that as long as fallible humans are tasked with the responsibility to police society, we will always have bad cops. We will always have excessive force and unprofessional conduct. All of these flaws in human nature, though, and this is the important part, all of these flaws in human nature should manifest in a way that are distributed evenly amongst all people. And it's It's not just, though, about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and countless others whose lives are unnecessarily cut short at the hands of police. The social issues here of disparate treatment and disparate opportunities based on superficial things like the color of your skin, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your disability status, it stretches far beyond policing. So we all recognize that much work lies ahead of us. It's my hope, though, that discussions like we're having today and discussions that we'll have tomorrow will make the future better than the past and tomorrow a better day than yesterday. And thanks again for this opportunity. I truly appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much, Chief Newton, for taking time out of your schedule to spend time with us. Thank you for those comments. And again, we'll also circle back to you a little bit later on in the program. So at this time, I'm going to ask Dr. Latasha Sullivan, who serves as who's a director of a university counseling center. If you please unmute your line. And again, feel free to comment on anything you've heard from either of the other panelists or the students. Also, please feel free to share your personal thoughts.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. And I'm very grateful that the other panelists are included and for the words that have been shared. To the student leaders, I applaud your vulnerability and your presence. We're asking you to do something that's very difficult, which is to stand in front of other people that may be older than you, people that may have different positions than you, and asking you to speak on behalf of yourself and also student groups. And that's a very difficult thing to do. I know that you all may be hurting and having your own reactions, and I think it's talk better about your positions and being able to advocate for the Black people at this time. And so thank you for being a part of this panel and allowing us to have a piece of you. So as I was thinking about my involvement and inclusion in this panel, I wrestled with some things because I'm a two-time alum of the University of Toledo. I'm a current staff person, but before all of that, I'm a Black woman that's married to a Black man with a Black son and expecting another. And so I was grappling with some things. And so what I'd like to do is I'm just going to share, use some words from someone else to kind of start where my comments are going to be. I'm going to read a poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar, We Wear the Mask. We wear the mask that grins and lies, hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile, with torn and bleeding hearts we smile, and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears inside? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but oh great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, beneath our feet and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask. That poem, this panel today, and one of the lines or stanzas in her poem is, did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? And several times in there she says, but still I'll rise. And as I was thinking about these poems, it resonated with me because it speaks to our resilience, but then also the role that we've often had to play in showing up and covering our pain. So we all watched, many of us watched the tragic events unfold over the years and then had to return to work environments and communities, forced to pretend that during those hours, the mask is not what we don't feel. And systematically, mental health was not created for non-white individuals, thus for many alternatives. And we can fight stigmas regarding mental health. And so as I was thinking about my own family and community and even myself, witnessing these traumatic events that can evoke a myriad of emotions, I think it's important that our emotions don't make us weak, and that we're not separating ourselves from access to care. And so our ability to have emotions is actually, so I wanted to just kind of leave you over with challenging us all to connect to our feelings and reactions and express them. Seeking out our emotionally safe spaces, finding and expressing our voices, and then seeking and accessing help from a culturally competent provider when we need it. Because we matter, as far as our mental health, that it makes sense that we're hurting right now. It makes sense that people are frustrated, and our responses, our emotional responses are valid. And no one can tell you how to feel. And so I think it's very important that we acknowledge that our mental health, which has been had to be housed in other places for many years because it was not set up for minorities to receive counseling services, that is evolving, but it requires us all to do our part to be vulnerable, to be willing to seek the providers that matter, that to us, but also for us to even just find other safe spaces to express how we're feeling and to acknowledge those feelings. And so when I thought about my role here today, I wanted to just be a presence of a supportive individual that can hold emotions and acknowledge them. And so as I believe it was Naya was saying, I'm trying not to cry. It's okay if you do. And I think that it's important for us to acknowledge that we're not going to all feel the same way at the same time. And it's okay for us to have whatever reaction we have, raw and exposed, and being able to label it, to identify it. I feel some type of way is not a feeling. And so we have to learn how to identify what feeling words are and where we can express them and do that in a safe space. And sometimes that means that we have to put a boundary between ourselves and other people that want us to speak for them if we're not in a space to do that. So thank you again for allowing me to be a part of this panel, and I look forward to the questions and comments that come from the discussion today.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Dr. Sullivan, for that wisdom. Much appreciated. And of course, we will certainly circle back to you because we do know that good mental health is critical to our ability to navigate these difficult times. And ask everyone who's on the call or on the program here to please mute your phones. Much appreciated. Next, I'm going to ask Professor Dr. Ben Davis, who's professor of law at the university, to please unmute your line. And please, Dr. Davis, feel free to comment on anything you've heard thus far. Share your thoughts, please.
Okay, Willie, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak. So with regards to what all the students said, the different comments that were there, I was very moved by your anxiety, your anger, your hurt, your depression that you expressed in how you are experiencing these current times. And I want to echo the comment of Dr. Latasha Sullivan about the importance, if you can't handle it, of seeking some counseling. That's a totally healthy thing. I've been seeing a therapist for I don't know how many years, and it helps me. So, having somebody who is outside, somebody who's outside of your whole thing, who's neutral and listens to you and helps you work through the issues that you're having is a totally healthy response. And by the way, all those emotions that you are having, I'm just here to let you know that you are not crazy. You are quite healthy, because with a combination of watching a murder of George Floyd, watching maybe people right around you, or maybe you, 43 million people losing their jobs in 2.5 months, and a COVID-19 pandemic. And as I love to say, the corona does not play. At the same time, that's a lot to deal with being at home, having your life upended. So totally normal, all these emotions, I think they're healthy. Now, one of the things that's happened here, my comment is that you have this kind of situation where you have lots of things you think are positive yourself, and then the world is throwing all this negative stuff at you, and it can cause a kind of overload, a kind of depressive overload. An Italian sociologist talked about, named Francesco Alberoni. And in that, you start to reach out to people to talk, as many of us do. These demonstrations have started, things like that. People try to contact and talk about what's going on because they're feeling the contradiction inside themselves. And it's possible that all of that is going to turn into a movement. I know people think there's a movement right now. I think it's getting towards a movement, but it hasn't crystallized yet into something that's a movement. That's the first thing. The second thing I wanted to say to you is, please understand that the institutions generally of society tend to be kind of conservative and a little skeptical or scared even of any of these kind of spontaneous movements, at least in general. Institutions have power. And the question what they do with the power, but it's always kind of places where trying to maintain control. So you're going to experience any one of these next four things, and you're already experiencing. I'm just going to highlight them to you. This is from Al Baroni. The reaction will be they'll try to you'll be tried to be co-opted. You know, that's it. All these demonstrations are all the looters, and the looters are bad people, and you're not a bad person, so you don't want to support them. That'll be one thing. Or people will be very nice and supportive to you and listen to you. They won't change anything, but they'll make you feel like, gee whiz, or they'll say it's outside agitators, whatever. It's co-opting the movement to try to get it to calm down. Obviously, the second one, repression, those flash bomb grenades we saw the other night, and the horses pushing people back, and that kind of police force in Lafayette Park kind of thing. That kind of thing is part of making you feel like there's no chance that you can do anything here. By the way, keep in mind that there may be people who act like informants and people who have their own private agendas that they're trying to have operate in this space for their own advantage with completely no thought about George Floyd or minimal thought about any issues that really concern you, taking advantage of the situation. The third thing is that people you will be trying to make you think that this is all a fantasy. It's not realistic to think that you can do anything about this. Nothing can change. And so, you know, you're just living almost like parents saying, stop that and get back to schoolwork or something. You know, there was an old slogan back in the days in the student riots in Paris, which was be realistic, demand the impossible. Okay. So that's to kind of counter that idea that you think that it's a fantasy that for something to change. That's going to be something that's going to be encouraged in you. Finally, and I hope this doesn't happen, the thing that happens is that people start getting killed. I lived during the 67 riots in Newark and Detroit. In Detroit alone, 43 people were killed in those riots. And I hope we don't have that. There's obviously, I worry about a Kent State or a Jackson State kind of event happening in this kind of turmoil now. And that's one of the other ways that you get this kind of repression. So if you're wondering what to do in all these emotions and trying to reach out to people and trying to figure out what to do, all I'm just going to suggest is a couple things quickly. One is keep your courage up and come together in peace and with knowledge of how to be nonviolent. One of the things people try to do to co-opt this movement right now is they say, well, look, they're not as like those folks back in the civil rights movement who were so peaceful and all that. They're all radical out in the street. Well, what most people don't remember or understand is that those people in the civil rights movement had gone through extensive training about how to act with regards to what they were going to face in terms of repression. And so when they came into the contact with the repression, they had been very well trained. These demonstrations you're having right now are all spontaneous by people feeling this huge emotion. And some people are going to do some dumb stuff. Absolutely. But you need to be nonviolent. I personally have the view that if anyone is preaching violence to you, consider them to be an agent of the state trying to destabilize what's going on. It happened before, it's happened again. Second, there are many people in America who succumb to the fear. They're not worried about all this stuff. They're worried if any of this stuff is going to come in their neighborhood. And they're actually very happy that there's repression on people. So you have to understand there are people who do well in the status quo that you may think is abnormal. They think it's the normal. And so there is resistance that's there. It may not be open resistance to what you're thinking, but there is clearly resistance, and it's significant everywhere. And these folks tend to, whenever these things happen, swing to law and order. We saw that with regards to Nixon in '68, for example. They always swing to law and order, but what they mean is really, let's get back to where the way of oppression already continues. So if you want more than just a sign in your yard or walking around with a sign in your hands, you actually want change. What you have to do is have a movement that's going to change the law so that the kind of violence that is done that we saw with George Floyd is not just something that can't be done, but that it's not in the culture to be done, and that the prosecutors with their prosecutor discretion don't let it go by and not let police be prosecuted for these kinds of things. You have to also work on police training. I know there are wonderful people doing great jobs in that too, but that's the kind of things that you have to do just on the police violence thing. And trying to change those laws and trying to change that training means that you have to get your elected officials at the local, state, and federal level to actually do those changes. And unfortunately, there are people who like the way it is, and there are enough of them. I mean, how many of you remember those stand your ground laws? Those were passed. And so you've got to be aware that it's a hard slog. It's not impossible, but it's a hard slog. And, you know, obviously getting your elected officials to change things is going to be a crucial way of changing the laws, making sure the courts apply the laws in ways that are consistent with the things that you're trying to protect. So another thing I want to say is that when you're demonstrating and all that, the difference between back in the 60s and now is you have a bad economy now and you have a pandemic. One of the strategies in the 60s was getting arrested and going to jail. Well, in jail now, you run the risk of getting corona because of the non-social distancing. You have to really think about that as part of your strategy. And when you're walking around, 6 feet, 10 feet between you, you have to think consciously about the fact there is a real pandemic going on that can make you very, very sick. Maybe if this doesn't help, I can put it this way. Some guy got sick, he recovered, he got a bill from his hospital, $800,000. But luckily he had insurance, he only had to pay $200,000. So corona doesn't play and it is expensive. But I want to tell you that I want to encourage you to, if you feel like protesting, protest nonviolent. Constitutionally, you have a right of assembly and all that. Keep the spacing with everything. Try to avoid the slipstream of other people. But understand that if you want to change things, you have to change the law and you have to change the training. Otherwise, we're going to be doing this again. And I'll finish with, you can go on YouTube and you can see Weldon Irvin and the Poets. That was my cousin who 20 years ago made an album called the Amadou Project in honor of Amadou Diallo, who got killed in a doorway. That was 20 years ago. So there is nothing new under the sun. That's a question. If you want something to be new, you're going to have to really push to make fundamental changes in certain aspects of society. Otherwise, we'll be back a few years later doing this. And at that point, it won't be the first time you've experienced it. It'll be the second time. And you'll be a little more jaded about it. So just throw that out there. But I'm hopeful, believe it or not, positive about it. If you want to make it happen, it's what we do together now. Thank you. That's all I have.
Well, thank you, Professor Davis, for both the history lesson, taking us back, as well as providing some context for today. So thank you much for your wisdom, for your comments. So at this point, I'm going to turn the program back over to Dr. Cockrell to engage in our Q&A session.
Thank you, Dr. McKeather. Wow. Thank you so much for those different perspectives. Most certainly appreciate it. And so now we're going to move into our Q&A session. As you can see here on the screen, and for our online visitors, if you have a question, we're asking you to please post your question in the chat feature. Make sure you direct your question to any one of the panelists, or if it's for anyone, just make sure you can say any of those individuals can answer the question. But your question will most certainly be reviewed by a UT representative. And Dr. McKeather and I will be asking those questions directly to those panelists. Due to time constraints, we may not be able to respond to all questions, but at the end of this dialogue this evening, Dr. McKeather and I both will be providing our email addresses, and you're more than welcome to follow up with us individually. So to get us started, we have some questions for our panelists, but please go ahead on and start posting your questions in the chat, and we will start asking those questions momentarily. So to our student leaders, to Dr. Gordon or Naya or Isabella, As a student leader at the University of Toledo, do you have any initial concerns about the well-being and safety of our community? And then the second part of that question is, what recommendations would you share with the current administration during this time? So the question is, and either one of you all can unmute your lines and answer this question. As a student leader at the University of Toledo, do you have any initial concerns about the well-being and safety of our community? And then the second part, what recommendations would you share with the administration during this time? So Darren, Naya, or Isabella, feel free to unmute your lines and respond.
Yes, I hope everyone can hear me. I do have concerns because being Black is not something that we can just erase. It's worrying, and we don't have the luxury of not worrying whether or not our loved ones, whether we're on campus or off campus, are facing racism and discrimination, and have the luxury of like not worrying if our family members will be here the next day, whether they're inside of their homes or outside of our homes. So that's definitely a concern. Just even having the concern of, well, we're out there protesting, and I know that, well, I don't know, but hopefully you all have been keeping up with the news. There have been instances where police officers have been, again, abusing their authority and tear gassing people. So it's just trying to keep in touch with students and making sure that they are all right. We understand their frustration, and I'm not going to tell anyone not to protest because they have the right to be upset. They have the right to be angry. And so, just making sure the students are safe. So I definitely would like to see that the university, takes action to making sure that their students are safe, both on the streets and off the streets.
Nadia, thank you so much for your comments. And I just want to remind everyone that this dialogue is most certainly being recorded. And so there are some things that we most certainly will follow up with our student leaders. But any other student leaders have any comments they would like to share?
Hi again, Isabella. I don't think I have much to add on to what Naya had to say. I think I don't have to face what the African Americans or Black people on the campus, on or off campus, have to face. So I am unaware to the needs that they have and what they want to see be done for them. So I wholeheartedly agree with Naya. What are they going to do to protect Black students both on and off campus?
Very good. Thank you, Isabella. And so let's pivot to our faculty and staff members. We do have a question for you, so continue to post your questions in the chat and we will get to those momentarily. But as a parent of an African-American Black child, how have you engaged your child in a conversation about the recent incidents? And the second part of that question, have you provided your child with any advice or words of wisdom? So again, for our faculty and staff panelists, as a parent of an African-American Black child, how have you engaged your child in a conversation about the recent incidents? And the second part of the question, have you provided your child with any advice or words of wisdom? Any of you all feel free to comment.
She's being here. If I could start with the commenting on that. First, I want to address Naya's concern about safety. We share that same concern. And this week there was a protest, I'm sure you're aware of it, during Seaport at the Gateway. And I was there, my deputy chief was there. We weren't there as police officers. We were there in civilian clothes as a part of the protest. We had officers drop off water. It was an incredibly hot day, and we blocked traffic and actually assisted in the protest as it walked the streets adjacent to campus, ensuring their safety. So we are committed to make sure that our students are safe. I mean, we're standing with this protest. Clearly, there needs to be changes. So we support that. And the second piece of that is, believe it or not, I am the parent of a Black son. My son's 16 years old, and he's Black. His dad, his biological dad, is from Kenya, So it's kind of a unique position that I'm in, but I'll tell you, I provide probably the same advice that most of our panelists would say. And that is, you're about to drive, you're in driver's training right now. If you get pulled over by a police officer, you have no idea the training this police officer had, the day this police officer had, the conduct that this police officer is going to have when he approaches the vehicle. You need to put your hands on the steering wheel, and you need to make no furtive movements, and you need to be incredibly cooperative, and your life may depend on it. And that's unfortunately what I got to say to my son.
Chief, if I can just ask you a quick question as a follow-up. So how does it make you feel to have to give that advice to your son?
I mean, no parent should have to give that kind of advice to their child. They just shouldn't. It's insane. It's insane that that's where we're at.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I got an older son, if I can speak up. I have a son and a daughter. This is Ben. My son is 29, daughter 31. So they don't really listen to me. But what I said when they've gone to demonstrate is, please, 6 feet, 10 feet with this COVID thing, because it's just too much risk in the middle of all this. It's okay to demonstrate, but just watch out for yourself. And I say, anybody preaching violence, assume they're an agent provocateur, and don't listen to them. Just stay with the peaceful people. It's not worth it.
Great, thank you, Professor Davis. Professor Mungo, you get a comment?
Yes, I do. So as the mother of Black children, and specifically as a mother of a Black son, that conversation that the police chief had, as members of the Black community, it's called the talk, right? And so we all get it. And it looks differently depending on, whether you're male or female, but you still get that talk with how to interact if you are pulled over for being Black or for breaking the law, but you still are taught how to interact with police, because things like our passion or asking questions, right? Instead of being looked at as passion, it's looked as aggressive, and it's looked as then usurping authority or not obeying authority, right? But to answer the question about raising a Black male, so my son obviously is the son of a sociologist, and so who studies race, and so things and issues of race he has grown up around. So he's heard a lot of different things, right? But as he has transitioned from this, little cute boy until this 6'2", 15, almost 15-year-old, I have had to have real conversations with him that you are no longer, you're still cute, but you won't be seen as such if you get pulled over. You won't be seen as such if you and your friends are walking in the neighborhood and you get questioned by police officers. And so explaining what's going on to him, he actually wants to participate in a protest. And so my husband and I are working on what that's going to look like because of his age and because of obviously how the protests are going. But having to explain to him that because of the color of his skin, because of what he looks like, he's light-skinned, he wears dreads. Because of his height, he will not be seen as a child and as my sweet, sweet boy. He will be seen as a threat because that is how Black males are seen in society, unfortunately. And so I have had to slowly nick away at his innocence as he began getting taller, because I needed to put him in the situation that says, I need you to be safe. It's mama's job to make sure you're safe. And so therefore I have to prepare you to be safe. I'll give you a perfect example. We have a family tradition of scaring each other no matter where we are. And in a Meyer parking lot a couple of years ago, he scared the bejesus out of me. And we were outside in the parking lot and I screamed, and I immediately looked around and I saw an onlooker, and then I started fussing because all I could see was this person seeing this Black male may be causing harm to this Black woman, right? Not seeing a son playing a practical joke on a mother because he was so tall. And so it's really important. So at that moment, I had to explain to him that you can't do that. We can no longer do this in public. It remains in the house, because I was afraid for him at that moment.
It's a piece of a pound.
So
You're
raising
right.
Black men during this time is definitely difficult. And as a parent, it's taking away the innocence. You know, child no longer once he is no longer a certain height.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mungo. Much appreciated. And so again, I'm continuing to troll through everyone who's on the line. I'm going to continue to ask people to please mute your lines if you're not speaking. Dr. Cockrell.
Yes, so we received a question, and this is for one of our student leaders. Do you have any suggestions on what Toledo student organizations can do to support this fight for justice? They're speaking from a perspective of someone who's in one of the colleges as an academic organization. So again, do you have any suggestions on what Toledo student organizations can do to support this fight for justice? So Dr. Gordon, Naya, or Isabel, anything that you would like to see from your fellow student organizations? Of course, we have over 400 plus registered student organizations here at the university, but what would you like to see from your peers?
Dr. Darren Gordon. So to be honest, one of the things we really need to do is really be pressuring our administrators, our respective colleges to realize that the change that we really want to see exists outside the bubble of the university. This really is a community-wide thing. So we should be having or expecting our deans and presidents to be talking to the mayor of Toledo to figure out what practices he needs to do to limit some of the issues that are going on, and not just the mayor, but all the other people who play critical roles in issues that have affected underrepresented minorities disproportionately. So we definitely need to not just sit back and say we want to do things on a small scale within our own groups and essentially preach to the choir, but we need to pressure our actual administrators, our actual university, the people who we pay tuition for and all this money for it, to actually make and enact the change that we want to see within our communities.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon. Naya or Isabel, you all have any comments there?
I do. But just speaking on campus, because I spoke with some other student organization leaders earlier this week, and they asked me essentially the same question. Well, if you have students that identify as Black, African American, the first thing that you could do is start within your own organization. See how you can be more diverse and inclusive, and what they feel that their membership within your organization is, because you can't correct a problem beyond your organization if you don't know the problem that exists within your own organization. And then outside of your organization, protest. If you don't feel comfortable protesting because of COVID-19, that's completely fine. Donate to a fund. $1 can help, 50 cents can help. Share information. It's just knowledge. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is key. And so you want to make sure that you are sharing information so that people understand that it's beyond police brutality. It's a systemic issue that keeps people of color, specifically Black people, oppressed, to where we're staying poor. We can't get an education, and if we do, we're lucky, and we're dying left and right. Oh, that was my end. Sorry.
I think, hi, I just also wanted to add that if you don't have any people of color, or specifically Black people of color in your organization, maybe wonder and ask why. And secondly, you might want to start off by saying that even though your organization might not deal with political things on a daily basis, this is a time for you to stand here and say, well, if you find that this is wrong and that this is wrong, that you take a stand and you say, we are the organization of this, we are the chapter at the University of Toledo, we are for the Black Lives Matter movement. And here are some resources that we have to help, as Naya said, because the information that others have access to, others don't have access to. I know a big thing with one of the things that happened on social media was the Blackout Tuesday, where a lot of people posted the blackout pictures, but that really just filled up the Black Lives Matter hashtag with so many blank pictures that no one had access to the information, and that was a specific hashtag they used to get information to. So just
if I could jump in on that too, is that on social media, there's a lot of things, you got to be a little prudent about stuff that you see, because there's a lot of stuff that's being put out there that you think is supposed to be sort of in favor of what you think is good, but it may not be, okay? I mean, I don't know how to explain it any. There are things that get photoshopped, there are things, because there are particularly at least a couple countries in the world, I believe Russia and China in particular, who have an interest in fomenting dissent between us. That's part of their cyber acts on us. So I'm not being a paranoid, helicopters thing, but I'm saying it's real. And so things that you think you're reacting to that you think is from somebody who seems like they're sympathetic, it could be a complete bot kind of operation. And so you just have to be a little vigilant. I don't know how to do that. I get played all the time, but just beware.
Dr. Flack, if you don't mind if I add something that I forgot to mention, and I think that the most important thing that people can understand and get from this is that this is not a trend. And again, I don't speak for all Black lives. I definitely don't. But I know for a fact, me personally, that's how I feel. This is not a trend. This is not for you to feel as if, oh yeah, I'm going to post hashtag Black Lives Matter, just because it's trending right now. No, this is our lives. These are the things that we have to go through daily.
Thank you so much, Naya, and thanks to everybody else who responded to that question. I do have another question. This is for our faculty and staff. And the question is, I understand that voting in local elections is extremely important in making change happen, whether in police reform or otherwise. But with the elections being 5 months away and change needing to happen now, what is the best course of action we can take immediately in addition to protest and donating? With the elections 5 months away, what are some of the things and the best course of action we can take right now in addition to protest and donating? So any of our faculty, staff, colleagues can feel free to chime in.
Yeah, go ahead. This is Ben. So can you hear me? Okay. I mean, elections are to put people into office. Right now, there are people in office, okay? So you can go to the people who are in office and get them to pass laws and change things and organize with regards to doing that. Trust me, there are efforts by different people right now to get laws passed that favor them with elections coming in 5 months. So if you want something changed or you want police training change, you need to be contacting the mayor's office, find out what you need to do, who are the groups working on it, moving it, to make some proposals and say, let's get this done, or at the state house level. I mean, you don't have to, the election's not the only thing. It's an everyday battle because there are people working every day to keep things a certain way. And if you want to change, you got to be there too. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. Sorry, that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Professor Davis. We have a next question. So I'm going to ask everyone, we're going to eventually pivot to a call to action. So if you start thinking now about your thoughts about call to action, or what are some things we can be doing at the University of Toledo to help prepare either faculty, staff, or students to deal with racism or other issues associated with what's happening currently. So my question is for Chief Newton. The question is, Chief, how does the police department approach cultural sensitivity in training? As a second part, are there plans to revisit this practice?
Yeah, we always revisit our practices. We're always striving for the best practice. In university law enforcement, we've been ahead of our municipal counterparts in understanding that If we don't have the community's trust, we have nothing. And we cannot accomplish our mission without the trust of the community. So we've realized that for a long time. I think our municipal counterparts are finally kind of getting that message. But we're always revisiting training. Right now, our policy manual is available online. Anyone can look at it. And we contract out with a company that provides best practice policies for law enforcement agencies. All of our officers have to acknowledge every single directive. They're all changed based on legal rulings and best practices as they're updated. And it comes with daily training briefs that talk about sensitive issues like use of force, racial bias, things of that nature. And we do a lot of intensive trainings, and you're going to hear this training, and they're right. We should always look for better training, but there's other things that we can do. And I'll tell you one that's not very popular that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, but I'm an at-will employee. That means the university can get rid of me whenever they want, but police officers have many layers of protection afforded to them by state law. Here's a news flash. It is not easy to get rid of a police officer. There's police officers that are fired based on their conduct, and the state employee review board will bring them back and reinstate them. So it's my opinion that all police officers should be at will. You know, the governor just came out the other day and said that we've got to get rid of the bad apples, but we've got restraints on us to do that. So yeah, I mean that's a real kind of revolutionary thought. It's been a longstanding practice that police and other public employees have layers and layers of protections. But in my mind, that's probably one of the most effective things that we could do.
Okay, thank you, Chief. So I
say something. Can I say something?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate what Chief Newton said, but I wanted to just say one thing. When we forget that the bad apples reside in a tree that is bad, we individualize the problem, and it allows us to forget the larger systemic issue. So it's really important that we take away, yes, and you're absolutely right, bad apples exist, right? But they also exist within a system that does not discipline the bad apples, right? That does not, so it's important that we remember racism exists in a larger structure, not just in the individual. Just wanted to remind everybody of that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mungo. So I have one more question for I think for the faculty, if I may, Dr. Cockrell. And this question, I'm not sure if I'm going to phrase it. I'm going to phrase it just a little bit. So to the whoever presented it, please forgive me. The question is, how will UT plan for a new wave of activists? So I'm thinking the question is, I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. How does UT prepare students for activism? So I don't know if either Professor Davis or Mungo or anybody else can address that. How can the university begin to prepare or train new wave of activists?
Can I?
Absolutely.
Well, I think we do that already, quite honestly. I mean, in all the different places that people get involved, I'm thinking of the work of Celia Williamson with regards to all around the human trafficking and the students who work in those areas. I know about students who work at the clinics, at the law school, doing things and do other kind of activities. So I think there are the basic thing is try to encourage those students to be active as they're learning. I mean, they've got to learn what I recognize it's hard to believe, but there's actually things to learn that takes time to figure out, and that actually other people have been through these things before. I love to say to people, nothing new under the sun. And then they're all surprised. I said, no, this is like this or that. And so you see that there's history. that and ways that things have been approached. And then to try to see, okay, what's the strategy I can do? The one thing students have that's always wonderful, they have that energy. They have incredible energy and the ability to make some things happen. And so, you know, that's the thing is welcome the activity. You know, welcome the activity and help them get where they want to go, you know.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Pose a question to your question, Dr. McKether. I saw someone in the comments earlier. It goes from the Peace Ed and the Peace Ed to help prepare students. And I think where I'm wondering is, while we have some pockets of places where advocacy and social justice are highlighted on campus, but if we had a concerted effort, would that be something that the university would stand behind if we said that we prepare advocates and individuals to exercise their voice and we teach them about the laws, and it's something that's bigger than housed into a particular department, but that was a particular effort? Would the university support that? And I think that that's something that, for me, I'm curious about, because I think one of the challenges we have on campus is that sometimes everybody doesn't have access to know where to go to get this information or how to be involved, or who it is that would be able to teach them these things. And so it's kind of like, if you don't know a person to get you in, you're just waiting to find out. And so I'm just curious as to, where that's just a question, maybe that's hypothetical at this point, is if we had a concerted effort to say we're going to train our students on how to be activists for Black Lives Matter in particular, and that we're going to allow them the space to advocate not just off campus, but for on campus practices, what might the administration, whether be support there to do that, or would that be something that someone would have to do on their off time?
Sure. So I guess I'm part of the administration, so I'm not sure if you're asking me that question and Dr. Cockrell, but you know, I think I can say in general that the university would support an initiative where we began to sort of train students for the types of things that you're talking about. And I'm just also keeping an eye on the chat, and I'm seeing one chat from Dr. Snowworth where he talks about there's a course that's offered, PJS, Nonviolence and Conflict Transformation, that's offered occasionally as well. So I think the one thing that we might want to do as an institution is begin to look across all the courses that do this type of advocacy work, to train students, rather, begin to maybe to highlight those courses in a very intentional kind of way.
Dr. McKether, I most certainly agree with you, and I think this may be something we can work with our Office of Student Involvement and Leadership to help train some of our students in our 400 plus registered student organizations. And so Naya, I know you serve as the president of the BSU, so I just want to highlight, you know, the work that you all are doing with your freshman leadership class and how you all are training the next generation of leaders. And so I think this may be an opportunity for us to model some of the work that you all are currently doing within your organization to other organizations. And most certainly to Dr. Sullivan's point, how do we train the next generation of leaders and make sure they're going to be global citizens and stand behind things that are unjust and do not represent the population. And so I think that is something we most certainly can support and probably stand up some programmatic efforts to support our students.
Dr. Cocker, if I can also add, I just got a text from someone reminding me there's a new initiative called Changemakers at the university, and it reads, Changemakers offers a unique experience for University of Toledo college students with a passion for social justice. And so that's one opportunity. So I'm happy to connect students with that resource. But again, I think probably we would do ourselves a real good justice by bringing together in one location a menu of what those opportunities are and making sure that our students are aware of them.
Dr. McKether, I think we've kind of transitioned into the next part of the program, which is the call to action based off some of the comments that was most recently shared. And so again, we are recording this event tonight, and we're going to be able to go back through it and review it. I know we were unable to get to all of your questions, but I assure you that Dr. McKether and I most certainly will follow up along with our panelists so we can make sure that your questions are answered. So Dr. McKether is going to lead us in a discussion about our call to action.
So I'm watching the clock. I know we have about 8 minutes, and so we do plan on being respectful of everyone's time. So I want to pose this question to the students, really, and faculty others can chime in as well. So we're coming up on the fall semester in, in a couple of weeks or months or so it seems. What are some things that you think we need to be thinking about doing in anticipation of the fall semester related to this idea of a call to action? And that's any, I guess, for anybody on the panel, faculty, staff, or to the students.
I, Ben, I think a call to action is good. A call to action, that builds to the next level of trying to identify what the action is, I think. So that's just what I throw my two cents in. If people are sitting there stressed and feeling depressed, they're not doing anything. They're just sitting there. So let's move things forward.
Okay, okay.
I actually read a question, and please forgive me. I think the person still might be in the call, but their question was student governments from other schools, such as the University of Minnesota and Ohio State, are calling for their institutions to break their relationship with city police departments. What is Toledo's relationship with Toledo Police Department, and will it be reevaluated? I think that that's maybe a step. So do we have? So I guess I'm asking the question from this person since it didn't get answered. Do we have a relationship with the Toledo Police Department, and possibly will it be reevaluated? And if the person that asked that question, if you can kind of say something again, just so I can see your name.
So Chief, do you want to chime in here and maybe provide a response to that question?
I certainly can, but it's more from the position. My response is more from the position of the police department, which is a small part of the university, and we in fact have a relationship with Toledo Police. It's the same relationship we have with any police department that borders our campus and that we work with, like Ottawa Hills, Sylvania Township, and local police departments. And we have a positive relationship with them. And if if there's incidents on our campus that we need assistance from, they've come and assisted, and we've done the same for them in certain situations. So our relationship is positive, and I think instead of severing that relationship, I think we leverage that relationship. And I know the chief quite well, George Crawl, and before COVID, if you were to look at his social media, I've never seen a busier man, or a man that keeps a busier schedule. He's at every church. He's at every community event. His schedule is dizzying. So he is committed to creating positive relationships with the community. He is open for dialogue, and I think instead of severing that relationship, it should be leveraged.
Thank you, Dr. McCarther. But to also answer your question as well, one thing that I have talked about, I talked with some of our general body, is that yes, we thank you for the support with Black Lives Matter, and understanding that we are hurt, but we would also like your support, like the university support, like other student organizations, our fellow Rockets support when it comes to our events, and not just when tragedy happens like this. So definitely seeing more faculty and staff and other students attend events that are hosted by Black student organizations.
Okay, thank you, Nye. Anyone else as we begin to sort of wrap up?
Because I think we're talking about call to action and preparing for the fall semester. What's coming to mind for me is thinking about what type of literature and resources are providing to professors and individuals that are going to have contact with students in the classroom, and what practices they're implementing in the classroom regarding dialogue around current events. So even in a math class, that doesn't mean that there won't be situations where there's diversity represented and present in the room, and yet also tension. And so making sure that we're keeping training is from top down, left and right, and also encouraging support to our Black students. We also have to empower individuals that are not minorities to learn about how to be inclusive, and what does it mean to, not kind of dispelling that white fragility
Okay.
If I could add one thing, one great question to add is ask people, when did they ever have their first African American teacher? Ask everybody that. Because I have students at the law school who I am the first one in their entire life, okay? It's a very deep experience for people to realize that at that age, I'm literally the first African American teacher they've had. You can do it with Latino or whatever. When did you have a first teacher of color in your, as a way in kind of thing?
Thank you, Dr. Ben. Tell you what, it's 7 o'clock.
I would like to.
Dr. Mungo, we'll give you like 30 seconds to get
I promise it'll be fast. I agree. I think I saw someone suggest the book White Fragility. I also like to suggest How to Be an Anti-Racist is another good book. And one thing I want to say, though, as we move into the fall and we have these interactions and whatever type of, good, Angela Steiner just wrote the author's name down. Be mindful of putting your Black students in positions that re-traumatizes them, okay? So while it's one thing to get their experiences and it's one thing to, have them share, but make sure that that space is safe because it is important that they are not re-traumatized as we're trying to help, learn their experience as we're helping to teach, right? We have to know not to re-traumatize. While the intention may be good, we cannot do it again to them, right? Because then we become part of the problem. That's all.
Wow. Well, thank you, Dr. Mungo, and I can see Dr. Sullivan shaking in agreement. Yes, let's not re-traumatize our student. So as we wrap up, let me just say, clearly we did not get through everything we wanted to get through. There's a whole list of questions that still remain. So we know that this is going to be a series. So we're going to be planning a series of these over in the coming weeks, leading up to the semester. Even once the semester starts, we'll also have these going on. So one of the things that I'm going to ask people who are listening, in particular students, as well as faculty, staff, and the community, to please, if you have thoughts about what a series or what a topic might look like, we'd love to hear you. I can tell you that the next Dialogues on Diversity is scheduled for Thursday, June 25th. And that event is going to be a panel of faculty at the university who will be sharing their expertise in various areas related to whether it's race, class, privilege, trauma. And that event is going to be held in collaboration with the Africana Studies program, and Professor Steiner will probably be hosting that session. So we look forward to that. So everyone, please keep your eyes open and please, schedule the next event, which will be in 2 weeks. Again, June 25th 5:30 to 7, same format. And we will spend more time learning how to manage WebEx prior to that time. So thank you. Dr. Cockrell.
Thank you, Dr. McKether. As we shared at the beginning of the presentation, that we wanted to make sure that we notified everybody on the call about our community resources. And so for our students, Dr. Latasha Sullivan is most certainly on the call, and we have free confidential services available to you at the Counseling Center. We also provided the number there. As you can see, it is 419-530-2426. They are providing telecounseling to our students during this time. I also wanted to highlight something that Dr. Sullivan kind of talked about, that they are in the process of creating focus groups centered around different things. So students, please take advantage of this resource. And then for our faculty and staff members, we have the Employee Assistance Program that's available to you. And the number is 1-800-227-6007. And so this is most certainly the resources that are available to you at the university. These resources are free to you. So please take advantage of all of these resources in the event that you may need them.
Okay, so that concludes this evening's program. Once again, thanks everyone for engaging. We know we ran about 4 minutes over. We will do better as we move forward in the future. So once again, thank you so much, and go Rockets.
And you'll see here on the screen, Dr. McKether and I provided our email addresses here. So in the event that you want to do any type of follow-up and have some questions for us, please feel free to email us both, and we most certainly will respond to you all. But please be safe. Thank you all so much. And as Dr. McKether said, go Rockets.
Bye.
Good evening, everybody.